or 6 years ago, I was the executive editor of the Hollywood Reporter, and we were publishing a thick, glossy weekly magazine. And filling a magazine is an extremely hard thing, especially when it's Vanity Fair-like, but it's not once a month, it's once a week, and we would have a weekly ideas meeting. And one of the things I would do is look at anniversaries and say, what happened 20 years ago or 50 years ago? And I discovered that it was the 50th anniversary of Vivian Lee's death. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I've always loved, who doesn't love Vivian Lee? And then I discovered that the Victorian Albert Museum in London had bought her archive, including Olivier's letters to her.
Wow.
And I thought, I want to write about this. And I went there, and what I discovered was an astonishing trove of documents, because she really kept everything, which he didn't. You know, I later found that her letters to him have largely disappeared and nobody knows where they are. And I began to look into their story, and it's one of those things that just became more and more and more interesting. And they're really extraordinary people. Neither one came from the kind of background that you would think from the roles that they played. Olivier was the son of a country parson, a real zealot, self-hating man who also hated his son, and his son hated him. Olivier's massively traumatized by the death of his mother when he was 12, fled into acting, was not initially a particularly good actor, and managed to transform himself at different stages of life beyond anybody I've ever seen. Got married young, he was still a virgin, had a not great marriage to an actress named Jill Esmond, and then met Vivian. Vivian wasn't British. She was born in Darjeeling, and as I was just saying to somebody here, one of the most interesting parts of researching this book was going to India for 2 weeks, trying to track down where Vivian lived, and ending up in this little restaurant in Darjeeling, which is this town cut into the Himalayas, with roads that just run around and around the mountains, and going to this restaurant with the manager of a tea plantation who was showing me around. And when I went to order a bottle of water, he said, no, the water here is fine. I was so violently sick, crawling across the floor. And so, you know, blood, sweat, and tears went into this book. And one of the frustrating things is that when I'd done my first draft, pretty much everything about India got cut. So, but the research was there. Anyway, Vivian had been sent away from home to go into a boarding school in a convent when she was 6.5 years old, and came out, married early, and in 1934 went to the theatre and saw Theatre Royal with this matinee idol, Larry Olivier, and instantly fell in love and said to the friend she went with, that is the man I'm going to marry, forgetting that she was already married, and so was he. They began to know each other, became friends with this odd dance. Olivier and his wife, Vivian, and her husband, for 2 years they were friends while Vivian and Larry were having an affair. And then in June 1937, they ran off together. And it was an amazing tracking down exactly when and how it came about and where each one was and who found out. I was really helped by a series of letters in the Academy written by one of Olivier's closest friends, Tony Bushell. I want to thank Carrie Bible, who's here, who put me in touch with David Stem. Thank you, Carrie, who led me to them. And Bushell wrote to a young man, never knowing that these letters would end up in the Academy, with all sorts of insights into the Oliviers, whom he loved, including the fact that when they fled, they went to stay with him. And it's amazing how often they were separated from that point on. So June 1937, they run away, they hide, they end up living together, living in sin, as we used to say. And then in 1938, Olivier gets the lead role in Wuthering Heights, comes to America. Vivian doesn't initially because she's doing a play. The play closes and she comes out to see him. There's an amazing moment where he meets her at the airport, and David O. Selznick and Samuel Goldwyn, all the others, were so terrified of the press that Olivia was hiding in the back of the car when Vivian came out of the airport. And she was furious, and he drives her, tries to take her on the scenic route. This is just before she lands Gone with the Wind. And she's looking around and she turns to him and says, forgive the language, I hate this fucking place, you know? Well, days later she landed Gone with the Wind. And Gone with the Wind came out, Wuthering Heights came out, and they went from being minor actors. Olivia had been fired by Greta Garbo. That's how minor he was and how bad he was. They went from being pretty minor actors, she more minor than him, to being absolute global celebrities, just unrivaled before Burton and Taylor. We forget that. And she was under contract. He never signed a long-term contract. And they finished Gone with the Wind. They did a terrible production of Romeo and Juliet. They went on tour trying to make money, spent $90,000 of their savings, and lost everything. And the war broke out, September 39 in England. They wanted to go back, and they couldn't. And the ambassador, the British ambassador, said, you must stay and help the cause. Remember, America was not hugely in favor of the war. And there's a great nationalist movement that said we shouldn't fight. And they wanted to do something, didn't know what. They were absolutely lambasted by the press in England for not going back, even though they'd been told to stay put. They didn't know what to do. And Alexander Korda came to him. Korda was in love with Merle Oberon, Olivier's co-star in Wuthering Heights. Apparently they hated each other. And Korda said, a very avuncular, wise figure, said to them, have you heard of Emma Hamilton? And Olivier says, you mean Nelson's bit? That's his term, not mine. Actually, Emma Hamilton was one of the most fascinating people in history. Sort of prostitute, courtesan actress who became Nelson's mistress. For those of you who don't know, Nelson in England is the equivalent of George Washington here, one of our great, great, great heroes. And she was married to somebody else, a much older man, who seemed to condone their relationship. And eventually, all three of them were living together until the first husband died. And it's kind of not quite a menage a trois, because I think the first husband was sort of beyond menaging, or whatever the term is. And this was the sanitized film. Korda said, let's do this. It was clearly pro-British propaganda, done at the last minute with next to no research. No one ever quite knew whether Nelson's eye patch should be on the left or the right eye, you know. It raced into the film. It's written by R.C. Sheriff, great British playwright who moved out here. Connected to Olivier because he wrote a great British play called Journey's End, a World War I play. Olivier had starred in it and left it to do Beau Geste on stage, thinking that Beau Geste would make his name, and it was a complete flop. So here they were reunited on this. They start shooting the film very quickly. Korda's brother, great designer, had done the sets. They had these model ships. They're actually pretty convincing, you'll see, with like frogmen operating them underneath the water, you know, because the ships are only about 5 feet high. And then halfway through the shoot, they realized that the script hadn't been sanctioned by Hollywood's censorship office. And they went into this terminal agony, and the film could very easily have been pulled. You know, the idea that this woman was living in sin with Nelson was completely verboten. And at the last minute, Sheriff came in and did a rewrite, which sort of had, you know, this you know, formulaic ending. So the film and the facts have nothing to do with each other. it's kind of interesting when the movie came out, the New York Times gave a very good review, praising its fidelity to the truth. You were going to watch a very romanticized version of Nelson and Emma's story, played by Olivier and Vivien Leigh when they were at their most in love. He was constantly trying to make her laugh. We say corpse in England. She was incredible, never laughed, never forgot her lines until someone said cut, and then they would just burst into giggles. They had some pet dog hanging around, sheepdog, that only briefly appears in press reports at the time, then you can never find out anything else about it. Both of them kind of despise the film. They love theatre, not film. And this was the peak of their romance. And they made very few films together. And it was before the nightmare that set in, when, as you may know, Vivien turned out to be bipolar. And this is before lithium was put on the market, which would have solved all their problems. And so you get Olivier and Vivien Leigh at their most exquisite, at their most romantic, and having written this book, spent 4.5 years researching it, knowing that this horrible illness is lurking and about to ruin their lives. So I hope you enjoy the movie. Hope you enjoy. This is the British cover of the book, which is completely different from the American one, interestingly. But if you do read it, please let me know what you think. And thank you very much for being here. Thank you.